Hi there everybody. So we are looking at water pathways, water and mineral ion pathways through plants today. So first of all, just an overview thinking about why water moves. If you think about what you've learned before about osmosis, water will always move from an area of higher water potential and it will move to an area of lower water potential. That will always happen, okay? So osmosis is the movement of water from here to here. Now if you think about a tree, so here's a lovely picture of a tree, and we think about how water moves through this tree. So water will move from the soil, A, to the leaf, B. Okay, so the water will come from the soil and it will move up through the branches and into the leaf. If we break that pathway down though, then we could say that it goes from A to B to C and then to D. So if water is going to move from the soil into the root, then we know that the water is moving from high water potential to a lower water potential. So A has a higher water potential than B. If we know that the water then moves from B up to C, so it's going up the stem, then again we can say that the water potential here at C must be lower than B. And again, the water keeps moving up to D. So by putting all this together, we can say that D has got the lowest water potential. And as you move down here, the water potential is getting higher. And A, which is the soil, that's where the water potential is highest. From D, so once the water is in the leaf, the water then evaporates into the air spaces in the leaf, and then it will move by diffusion from the airspace out into the air. So for that to happen, that means that the water potential in the air has to be lower than the water potential in the leaf. So always think about this. So if water is moving through a plant, then it must be moving from higher to lower water potential. Okay, so we're going to look just at what's happening in the roots now. So we start off with water in the soil, and we have to get the water all the way to the xylem. So here is a microscope diagram. You've seen something like this before, and I've highlighted there. It looks like an X, which is handy. So X for xylem, that's the xylem tissue in the middle of the root there. Around the xylem, we have a very thin, it's usually just one cell thick, a layer which is the endodermis. So the water has to get from out here in the soil all the way across here, has to cross the endodermis, and it has to get into the xylem. The outer layer, remember, so this layer here, this is our epidermis. And this layer here on the outside, our epidermis, that's where you will find root hair cells. So the water has to go all the way here. It's across the epidermis, has to cross the cortex, across the endodermis. There's another layer of cells there, which is the pericycle, and into the xylem. And if we just sort of simplified that and looked at it as a cross section, then it would look something like this. So there's our xylem, then we've got a cell of the pericycle, endodermis, cortex, and there is our epidermal root hair cell. Okay, of course they're plant cells, so we'll give them all some cell walls. And the water has to go from the soil through those cells. That's the pathway that we need to look at in a bit more detail now. Okay, so we're going to take that same diagram and just make it a little bit bigger. I haven't included the root hair cell here. Remember, not all cells in the epidermis have root hairs. So the layers here, we've got the epidermis and the cortex. Now again, remember, the cortex isn't just one layer thick. I've simplified this. As you saw in the previous diagram, the cortex is big, so there'd be lots of cells. So the water's going from cortex cell to cortex cell to cortex cell quite a long way until it's going to get to the next layer, which is our endodermis. Then we have the pericycle, and finally the xylem. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of those. So water is going to come in here, and one option is that the water moves along the cell walls. and that's called the apoplast pathway. So the water moves in, and whatever happens, the water is going to move in by osmosis. Okay. Oh, actually, sorry, no, that's not true. I said that incorrectly. If the water's coming in here, so this apoplast pathway, so the soil's out here, the water comes in, it's going into the cell wall, and it just stays within the cell walls. So at no point is the water crossing so far across the cell surface membrane. So because of that, it hasn't actually moved by osmosis. It's just coming in here by diffusion. It's only, remember, if you think about the definition for osmosis, it has to cross a partially permeable membrane. So this apoplast pathway is just moving along, diffusing. There's no osmosis taking place because it's not crossing the cell surface membrane. Now, the other option is that water comes in and it does cross the cell surface membrane. So it crosses the cell wall, crosses the cell surface membrane. It might also cross the tonoplast and go into the vacuole, but I haven't included that here. From there, to get into the next cell, it can pass through the plasmodesma, or if there's lots of them, plasmodesmata. So remember, the plasmodesmata are the like the little passages that connect one cell to another, and the cytoplasm is connected. So the water that's entered here could just continue along from cell to cell, going through the plasmodesmata until it gets to the end there. This is the symplast pathway. So water has entered by osmosis down the water potential gradient. It's moving through the plasmodesmata, and it's basically staying in the cytoplasm and maybe in the vacuole, but it is not going along the cell walls. Okay, so to get into the xylem, water will have to travel through the pits in the xylem wall. There is one problem though. In the endodermis, there is a layer called the Casparian strip. And this layer here, I'll go into a bit more detail of that in a minute, but basically this layer is made of a waterproof substance called suberin. And it blocks the cell wall of the cells in the endodermis. So the water that's moved along here in the cell wall, in the apoplast pathway, it gets stuck here because of the Casparian strip. That means that water has to move into the cell, and then it could continue on its way. If I just go back a little bit there. So the water has to cross the cell surface membrane and go into the endodermis, the endodermal cells, sorry. So that's what's happened here. It's crossed over the cell surface membrane. It's now in the cytoplasm. So that's why I've changed the colour, because this now represents that it's part of the symplast pathway because it's in the cytoplasm. So that water could then re-enter the cell wall and travel along the cell wall until it gets to the pericycle there. Okay, and then it goes into the xylem via the pits in the apoplast pathway. The other option for the water that gets stuck here in the endodermis because of the Casparian strip is it comes in and travels all the way through this cell, through the pericycle cell in the cytoplasm, but again, once it gets here, it's going to have to cross that cell surface membrane. Okay, and then it goes into the xylem. So this is part of the apoplast pathway because it has to cross the cell wall here. Now this is really important because the Casparian strip here, what that's doing is it's making sure that all water has to cross at least the cell surface membrane at least twice in its journey from the soil out here into the xylem. So if we look at that, water here that's in the symplast, it's crossed one cell surface membrane there, and then it has to cross another one there, so that's the second cell surface membrane. Water that comes this way, if it stays in the cell wall, it still has to cross the cell surface membrane there, and then it could cross the second one there, or it crosses the cell surface membrane here, comes this way, and then has to cross the cell surface membrane a second time here. So the Casparian strip is adding an element of control because the cell surface membrane is able to control the substances that move in or out of the cell because of the transport proteins that are in it. And that's important because the water that's moving through from the soil also has mineral ions dissolved in it. So by passing through the cell surface membrane, the cell and therefore the plant is controlling the entry of mineral ions. Okay, let's have a look in a bit more detail at the Casparian strip and try and visualize it a bit more clearly. So here is our cell with our Casparian strip, but obviously this is just a 2D representation. It doesn't really look like that. So if we turn it into a little bit more of a 3D cell, so it's a little bit like a sort of a box. But of course, if this is our cell, then the whole outer surface is our cell wall. So we don't need this line anymore. It's not a TV screen. So we'll get rid of that line like that. So we've now got our cell, our 3D cell. So this outer surface all around here, that's all our cell wall. And the Casparian strip is actually around the middle of our cell. Okay, it goes all the way around the middle, blocking the cell wall. So that means that if water tries to come through the cell wall, it gets blocked by the Casparian strip. If it comes through here, gets blocked. The only way that water can get through this cell, remember this is the cell in the endodermis, is if it comes straight through the middle. It's quite hard to draw this, but the idea is that it comes straight through the middle, through here. Okay, so the water's coming through. Okay, it gets to the cell wall there, and it then would pass through the cell wall and travel through the cytoplasm until it gets to the other cell wall, and then it's out on the other side. So that's how the Casparian strip blocks the apoplast pathway and means that water has to travel at least once through the symplast pathway, which means it has to pass through 2 cell surface membranes on its journey from the soil to the xylem. Okay, that's it then. They're the main ideas involved in water transport through the root. Thank you very much.